Hey everyone, glad to be back with you. As per usual, I'm going to hop on Facebook here on my computer in front of me and get that rolling with the sharing and then bringing up the feed so that I can see all of you who are joining us today. All right, we are shared, and as I have said in the past, as we are doing this devotional time together, if you have any questions that sort of strike you, or maybe some clarifications you're wondering about while we discuss the question that Jesus asks today of us, feel free to jot those thoughts or questions down right in the comment section, and I will revisit those towards the end. So, hey, I see some people already hopping on and joining. Debbie, good afternoon. Glad to have you with us. Hey, Jay, good to have you with us as well. So, I'm going to do a couple songs while we wait to see how many other folks are going to show up before we start the actual devotion time. So, these two are another flashback mashup. These are both from the around the middle of the first decade of the 21st century. So I think around 04, 05. So they are old, right? Sort of old. So you're welcome to listen. If you want to sing where you are, feel free to sing where you are. So here we go.
Living water rain down
eyes, be the center of our lives. We lift our eyes to heaven, we wrap our lives around your light. We lift our eyes to heaven, to you. We lift our eyes to heaven, we wrap our lives around your light. We lift our eyes to heaven, to you. So Christ, be the center of our lives, be the place we fix our eyes, be the center of our lives, our lives. We are hungry, we are hungry, we're hungry for more of you. We are thirsty, oh Jesus, thirsty for more of you. All right, good enough. Let's switch gears and do a little digging into some devotional time. If you have not been with us yet up to this point, we have been using as a springboard this book that I happened upon on sale somewhere at some point in the past and bought it. What did Jesus ask? A book of just a bunch of questions that Jesus asks in the Gospels, and different Christian leaders, authors, songwriters, different people take turns taking these questions of Jesus and then unpacking them and helping us learn from them. So the one we are going to be looking at today from the book, I've given sort of the title for this, The Discomfort of Extravagance. We're going to be looking at Matthew 26, where Jesus is given an incredible, extravagant gift, and we are going to see him ask this question of his disciples: why are you bothering this woman? So let's dig right into it. The full context, Matthew chapter 26, verses 6 through 13, and it reads like this. While Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured out on his head as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. "Why this waste?" they asked. "This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor." Aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." So, extravagant giving. We're going to talk today about sort of our discomfort in the midst of extravagant giving. But first I want to talk about examples of extravagant giving that we see around us in days like these. So I've become a huge fan of SGN, and if you are following in the YouTube world, you know that SGN stands for Some Good News. John Krasinski and his cast of just tons of cameos by his friends and his wife often. I think it started just as a way to actually bring some good news into the world in the middle of this global pandemic that we've been facing, in order to remind us and to encourage us that while there's hurt and there's people are down and people are distanced, yet there is good that is happening in the world. So if you've watched it, you know these extravagant outpourings of generosity that John lines up for the people on his show. One of the first ones, there was a young girl who was not able to go to see the Hamilton musical in person, and she'd been looking forward to it for forever, but it got shut down because of the pandemic. And so, of course, what does John do? He brings in Lin-Manuel Miranda, and he then he brings in the entire cast, essentially the main characters of the cast, and they do a song from Hamilton just for this one little girl sitting there watching at her computer screen. Just an incredible overflow of generosity. He's done other things too. He did one for healthcare workers in Boston, where he is from, I believe. And these healthcare workers, 5 of them, were taken on an impromptu trip to Fenway, got to go on the field, run the bases, and then were given lifetime tickets to that iconic baseball stadium. Most recently, he did an SGN graduation ceremony, because obviously so many graduates are not able to actually have their own, and so he decided to have one, and brought in graduation speakers like Steven Spielberg and Oprah Winfrey. So just above and beyond, right? It reminded me of the show was on several years ago, Extreme Makeover Home Edition. I don't think it's on anymore. Maybe it is, so correct me if I'm wrong. But in that show, people were recipients of just abundant, extravagant generosity, where their home was at least updated, if not entirely replaced. And what we see is, in most of the time in those stories, those people, those families, have been struggling tremendously with some sort of loss, some sort of challenge, some sort of real deep struggle, right? And we see that actually here in the text, because if you read what comes right before and right after this passage in Matthew, you can see that Jesus is sort of in the eye of the storm when it comes to his particular situation, right? If you go backwards, you will see that in the first 5 verses of Matthew 26, there is this conspiracy forming in the home, the palace of the high priest, and he has the religious leaders there, and they are now beginning to set in motion this conspiracy to try and figure out how to bring Jesus in, to hold him accountable, and to end his life because he's a threat to them. And then right after the passage that we read today, in verses 14 to 16, we see Judas going to religious leaders and exchanging, bringing them to Jesus in exchange for those iconic 30 pieces of silver. So it's like this moment is like the eye in the storm. This storm that's swirling that will lead to Jesus' crucifixion. There's this moment, this eye of the storm, where he is reclining at a table of a friend, and he is anointed in this moment. In the book, Simone Campbell is the one who writes this devotional, and she talks about how this gift would maybe compare to our day, because in our day it's not common for you as a guest, even a guest of honor, to have someone dump a bunch of perfume on your head. So she says this: "Into the room comes a woman with an alabaster jar of expensive ointment, who then proceeds to pour oil over Jesus' head. Now, this is not a 21st century custom, but in that time it was an act of generosity and extravagance. It was a way of making fragrant a raw stench world." I love that line. "The equivalent of being treated to maybe like a spa day or a stay at a 5-star hotel. The woman gives Jesus the gift of abundance." This scene of Jesus being anointed is found in each of the 4 Gospels, which I think highlights its importance. All 4 Gospel writers chose to include it as something that we need to take notice of. Now, the practice of anointing someone might have been somewhat common in their culture, but the extravagance of what we see here is what is unique. It's the value of the oil or the perfume or the ointment, however it's phrased in that passage, the value of it. In the account in John's Gospel, we're told that it's spikenard, which means absolutely nothing to us, right? Spikenard. So what? So I did a little research so that I could be well-versed enough to bring you some details, and I found a source that points this out. Spikenard was an uncommon perfume extracted from grasses that grew in the country of India. Once the juices were squeezed out of the grass, they were dried into a hard, lard-like substance, and turning that lard-like substance into perfume was a very lengthy and very costly process. If you add this to the cost of transporting spikenard from India to other parts of the world, like Palestine, and remember, this is before FedEx and UPS and airplanes and all of those things. So to get it from here to there, tremendously costly. You can see why this perfume cost so much money. Spikenard was so expensive that few people could buy it, and most had to buy one of the many cheap imitations that's available. We still do this today, right? There are those high-end perfumes and colognes that cost, hundreds, thousands of dollars for, tiny little bottles. And many of us kind of like, no, I'll get the generic. It's probably just as good. Same thing back in their day. Spikenard was an ointment that was so valuable, it was usually reserved only as gifts given to a king or to someone who was a noble. The cost of the ointment was worth about 300 denarii, is what we read in the passage, which if you try to import that in today's numbers and economy and dollars, approximately, someone guesses, about $54,000. That's the kind of extravagance we're talking about. The ointment that she used was most likely intended for her own burial, but instead she chooses to use it on Jesus in preparation for his burial. So, absolute extravagance and generosity. And so what did the disciples do when they see this happening? Do they congratulate her? Do they thank her? Absolutely not. They see this generous, extravagant gift, and they respond with something other than awe or excitement. We read that they say, "Why this waste? This perfume could have been sold at a high price, and the proceeds given to the poor." Interesting to note, because we know from reading the rest of the Gospels and the Jesus story that Jesus was very much an advocate for the poor and for the disadvantaged. So we should be at least a little surprised when that's not what happens. We should be at least a little bit surprised when Jesus doesn't immediately say, "Wow, you're right. That would have been a much better way to use these resources, would have been to sell it and to give it to the poor." But that's not what he does. He shoots back with disapproval at his disciples, and he says, "Why are you bothering this woman?" That's the question we're dealing with today. She's done a beautiful thing to me. Now, Simone Campbell in the devotional suggests that there's something in this generous gesture that makes the disciples uncomfortable, and maybe that tendency exists within us today. She writes, does the presence of exuberance and generosity make us nervous? And she goes on to give a couple of examples in the devotional about how she's part of a Catholic women's leadership conference that actually was censured by the Vatican in 2012 because they were spending too much time serving and caring for the poor and especially marginalized women, and not enough time was being spent on the bigger issues of the church. She talks about a bus trip that she took with a group, 11 state bus trip, and how there was this one church in Michigan that had for like 10 years been providing a free breakfast to their community on Saturday mornings. And of course, members of the community said that, I want to make sure that I get this right, that it was criticized because it was disturbing the neighborhood and causing a Saturday morning ruckus. Now, I think Jesus would love to find himself in the middle of a Saturday morning ruckus where needy people are getting fed breakfasts. But Simone goes on to say this towards the end of the devotional, and I really like it. She says, "I've come to think that this question is a sign of how gifts make us nervous." This question of, why are you bothering this woman? "I know that I can become uncomfortable when others overwhelm me with generosity. On our bus trip, a woman came up to me and gave me $5. She said she was unemployed and didn't have much but wanted to participate in our work. Her extravagance touched my heart, and I was tempted to give the money back. But in a flash, I realized that she was doing the extravagant thing of caring for us. She, like the woman in this gospel story, was reaching out to another and showing her care. Extravagance can be out of control. Generous gifts can make us nervous. This may be why it's easier to criticize great generosity than to question whether we are called to it ourselves." In this story in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus holds up a mirror and asks us to deeply look at ourselves. Am I someone who can let go of control and respond with generosity? Am I willing to reflect on those times when I grumble about someone else's gift giving? Am I willing to receive the gift, the generous gift of another? I will admit, like Simone, I struggle with receiving generosity. When I am given an extravagant gift, there's just this sense of discomfort that goes along with it. Now, obviously also mixed with profound gratitude, but I'm asking this question of myself as I read this devotion. Why is it that being a recipient of generosity and extravagance might make us feel this way? And here's the best I can come up with right now today, as I'm still sort of thinking and processing through this. I think it touches on our deeply held but often ignored measuring stick that we have internally of who is deserving of what. I think that is a sticking point that is lodged deeply within us, and we most of the time don't even realize it's there. This deep sense of deserving. Do I deserve this? Does he deserve that? Does she deserve that? When I'm abundantly blessed by someone else, I think that gets activated within me, and I immediately start thinking, I don't deserve this. I think that we live in a culture that tells us that if you didn't earn something, then you don't deserve it. Now, it's definitely still true that if you didn't earn something, you can't just take it. Like, that's a whole different story. But if you didn't earn something, it's being given to you generously instead. I think that's part of what makes us uncomfortable, because we have been programmed to think, if I didn't earn it, then I don't deserve to have it. And the economy of Jesus, as we read in this story, is definitely not about that. That's the kind of thinking that actually takes the emphasis off the generous person and puts it on ourselves. We can actually take an act of selfless, generous extravagance and make it about us because we somehow feel we aren't deserving. And I wonder if in the same vein, if we struggle with the discomfort of giving generously, let alone extravagantly, because we have this sort of baked in sense of deservedness that gets activated. Because like Simone said, when we give generously, we have to let go of control. We can't control what will be done with what we give. We can't control what other people may think or say about what we have given. And I think that lack of control makes us uneasy. And so I think we have this sense of uneasiness, whether we are recipients of great generosity or whether we feel a calling or an urge to be a generous or maybe even extravagantly generous person. I think it's interesting to sort of bring this to a close that the disciples say what a waste this is. This act of generosity, this anointing of Jesus, this preparing for his burial. They say, what a waste. And it reminds me of the Old Testament concept of gleaning. And if you want to read up on it, it's a practice in the Old Testament for the people of God where they were told in their laws, it was codified, that they were, as they farmed their fields, to purposely leave the edges unharvested, and anything that would like fall off during the process of harvesting was just to be left behind, right? It was really, in an economy that was all about rural farming, it was intentional wastefulness, or at least intentional inefficiency, which doesn't compute for us, right? And so in a place like ancient Israel, where you had some people who had no land, no family, and no provision. That was the way they survived. And often it was framed in that trifecta of the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. So the people of God were told to be intentionally inefficient and glean, intentionally wasteful, to bring it back to these disciples, in order that others may have something in order they might survive. Fun fact, gleaning was actually relatively common in even communities throughout Europe, all the way up through like the middle of the 1700s. And then modernity crept in and all sorts of things changed, right? So this is where I want to sort of finish today, is while we work on how our hearts are geared away from extravagant generosity, how we in our hearts get uncomfortable sometimes to receive it because of the sense of deservedness, or whether we get uncomfortable to give it because we feel like we're letting go of some form of control that we need to keep, and we need to ask God, why is this? God, can you change me? Holy Spirit, work in my heart, my mind, and my soul. How about we try a baby step of gleaning something from our own lives? Look at your own budget and say, are there edges to my budget that can be given away to organizations that specifically work with the widows, orphans, and foreigners in our day today. If we can't jump into extravagant giving because it's too hard, let's just jump into like doing something intentionally inefficient with our resources according to the world's view, and saying, I'm going to trim this out and give this to one of those people groups that's desperately in need. For instance, do you know a single mom who is struggling with consistent income? That might be a modern day version of someone who would be in that widow category who just needs provision in her life for her and for her children. Do you know of any ministries that are intentionally reaching out to immigrant groups in your community, to those foreigners among us? Or do you know of an organization that is doing a lot of good work in the area of foster care or adoption for those children who are orphaned among us? And so I want you to just think and pray about how you might be able to engage in that gleaning process as a way, as we sort of step forward towards unlocking our hearts to better understand and respond to generosity and extravagance. So I think that's all I really have today. I'm going to check the comments really quickly, and I do not see any questions. I see some other people joined in. So glad to have all of you with us, and I hope you'll be able to join us next time that we get together. And so until we meet again, ask God to work on your heart, to help you dig into those reasons that you have for maybe some uneasiness when it comes to extravagance and generosity. And I encourage you to read through the story again that we looked at today in Matthew chapter 26, where we see someone who extravagantly gives so much to Jesus, someone who had something saved up for herself, but realized that Jesus deserved everything, that she was willing to extravagantly and generously give that over to him. So great to be with you, and we'll see you next time.